because you are now a teacher of history at Brooklyn College.
Of military history.
Military history.
Yes.
Thank you very much for coming on my broadcast last Friday midnight and
Always a great pleasure.
and telling of your experience with the late Yuri Andropov. It was a chilling story. And by the way, in the middle of the night, I heard something in that story that I did not hear the first time, and I wonder if you've thought of it yet. Let me reconstruct something.
Right.
You were the military... first of all, you were in a Hungarian communist death cell.
Yes.
Believe that Soviet general who came... You were head of, like, the Hungarian West Point.
No, Hungarian General Staff School, a higher level of...
Higher than West Point.
Like the Command and General Staff College.
Okay, so you were a teacher at Hungary's highest staff
college.
field grade
I was
officer.
the commander of it.
You were the commander.
Right.
And this stupid Soviet officer came, and he just looked through one of your textbooks.
Yes.
And it was a sort of an exercise, you know, in tactics and defense and counterattack.
Yes.
And it showed an arrow coming at Hungary. No, it didn't even show an arrow coming at Hungary. It just showed an arrow coming from the right-hand side of the page.
Yes.
Now, the right-hand side of the page on a map would be east.
Correct.
This wasn't a map. This was just the right-hand side of the page.
Absolutely.
But this stupid Soviet officer went into a paranoid rage because he said, "You Hungarians have nothing to fear from the east. Your enemies are in the south."
In or west, yes. At that time in the south, Yugoslavia, yes.
Right. So for that, you got thrown into a communist death cell.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now then, the year was 1956, and you're in this communist death cell, and then funny things are going on in Hungary even before the revolution, and you get out of the death cell, and you are taken to a hospital.
Right.
The Petrifi circle, the poets are meeting, the peasants are restless, there's excitement in the capital, people are saying things they never dreamed that you could say under communism, and first, I hope that John Bircher is listening, first thing you know, they chop down the, first thing you know, your students, let's get this right now, because you're both my friend, you are the general of the military forces of the Hungarian Revolution, and you're a professor of history, so I got to be extra cautious with you at all levels, okay? At that point, on October 23rd, a delegation of students led a parade, led sort of a rally into Parliament Square to present the communist government with 14 points of greater personal and national freedom.
Right.
The rally grew, personal and national. It was like solidarity. Hungary was in the square. Hungary was in the square.
Yes.
Your communist secret police had never seen anything like this before, and they panicked, and they fired a few shots into the crowd.
Right.
They hit some people.
Right.
And the Hungarian Revolution, like a Western shootout in a Denver saloon 100 years ago, the Hungarian Revolution was on.
Correct.
And your hospital was invaded by freedom fighters. They picked you up, and they said, "Get out of that bed and get dressed. You got to be our military leader."
Something like that, yes.
And you were then taken to your boss, Imre Nagy, the leader of the Freedom Cabinet, the Freedom Prime Minister, and he said, "General Kirai, we have a call from the Soviet embassy. They are being sacked by Hungarian mobs, and they say if we can't protect them, then if we can't let them perform their legitimate ambassadorial and embassy functions, then they will have to seek protection from their own Red Army."
Correct.
And you and the late Imre Nagy both spotted that right away as an obvious, thick-ankled, flat-footed, combat boot, stuffed moose head ploy from the Soviet Union. They were simply building a pretext to re-invade Hungary.
Absolutely.
So you gathered your best soldiers around you, and you sped to that street.
Yes. But probably we have to emphasize that the man who delivered that ultimatum was Andropov, Yuri Andropov, who was at the time the Soviet ambassador in Budapest.
So you went to the embassy, and you left most of your army in a nearby square. You had a tank column with you to protect the embassy.
Right.
And you went up with a couple of jeeps full of people. You went to the front door. There wasn't a soul on that street.
Right.
The embassy was not being mobbed or sacked or looted or anything.
Absolutely true.
And you rang the bell, and a little slat opened behind a little barred door, a little barred window in the middle of the door.
Correct.
And you said, I am General Bela. I am here to see the ambassador.
Correct.
They made you wait for 10 minutes. What do you think happened during that 10 minutes? They were probably checking out your credentials, or...
They checked out my credentials, and then in the meantime, the ambassador, the late Yuri Andropov, then collected his entire staff, lined them up in the big hall on the ground floor, so that when I went in, you treated me like a king, you know, introduced me to all his associates in the embassy, and I felt tremendously strange. First of all, it was very strange that they let me wait so long in the door. Secondly, it was strange that when I went there for a real business, then he turned the whole affair into a kind of diplomatic nicety, introducing the entire staff. That my brain worked like a locomotive to see what is behind all of this. This Yuri Andropov has something with all of this. Otherwise, he would have sat down with me and would have turned to the business for what I can.
All right. On November the 2nd, 1956, you are inside the Soviet embassy in Budapest, a very happy Budapest, because 8 days earlier you had taken your country back. There was not much of a fight. Budapest was joyous. You really thought you were going to be a free country and that communism was over, and the Soviets said at that point all they wanted was a peaceful withdrawal from Hungary.
Correct.
Everything correct so far?
Absolutely correct.
All right. Now, the one thing that interested, the one thing that I sort of sat up in the middle of the night and heard, the purpose. Wasn't it strange? Here you had in effect dealt the Soviet Union its biggest humiliation in its history. You had rebelled. The entire population was on your side. The Soviet occupation army either did not want to or did not try or failed to put your rebellion down. Your flag was over your parliament building. It was over your country. Imre Nagy, your new prime minister, not approved by Moscow, was in. The embassy called and complained that Hungarian hotheads are destroying the embassy, and you fled there with tanks to protect the embassy. And it was absolutely quiet, and you were being given, here they were treating you cordially. That must have been mind-boggling.
Yes, and puzzling, very much puzzling.
Now,
I felt that something is on my mind of this man which he did not talk about.
you knew he had a hidden agenda.
He had a hidden agenda, yes.
All right. Now, you then, did he ask you, did Andropov ask you first about the hot-headed Hungarian mob sacking the embassy, or did you ask him about it?
The contrary. See, when I arrived there, and they could observe the sudden, disciplined move of military units and freedom fighter units in the district, that might have surprised them, that we were so much in control that within an hour a substantial armed force was there to protect the Soviet embassy. So that now, and I myself walked on my feet. Consequently, I saw there that the block was as peaceful as ever. Now, from his part, now to continue to pretend would have been totally silly. Consequently, he switched, and he told me, and what he told me was a lie, the same way it was a lie what he told the Prime Minister an hour before. What he told me now was that the Prime Minister misunderstood him. Really, there was no siege or no looting or no sacking of the embassy. There were only two old ladies who came into the embassy and told that the apartment was bombed out. Consequently, they were looking for a place to live during the winter, and they told that this place was, in other words, the embassy was not a good place for them because it has very high ceiling, it would have been very expensive to heat, and peacefully they departed. Of course, it was a nonsense.
All right, but this is the part of the story that came back to me in the middle of Friday night after you told me.
Yes.
The whole purpose of this exercise was to see if he could seduce you into turning toward the Soviet side, as Janos Kadar had done the day before.
That was my absolute sure impression. The case is that after this reception, during the reception, he introduced one after the other of his associates in the Academy. He always looked at me like a serpent. Whatever move, every handshake, whatever I did. And then when we were over of this nicety, then he gently touched my shoulder and asked me to go up to his office because he has much more serious thing to tell me than the alleged sacking of the embassy. And as we walked up in this beautiful Hungarian baroque little mansion on marble stairs, we went very slowly. They stopped several times, looked always into my eyes, told nice things, and somewhere in the middle of the stairs, he suddenly stopped and looked at me and he told, "You, General, know I'm sure that the Soviet government and the Soviet people are the best friends of the Hungarians." Now, it was so outrageous that I decided to behave as a diplomat. Yet, in my tone, I could not control myself answering him that, yes, I know, with a tone which, for Andropov, he was quite a sophisticated man, understood that I really told him that, of course, I know that they are not our friends. That was the turning point in our conversation.
Then the cakewalk was over.
Indeed, it was over. And then, like a businessman, he hurried up to his office. Almost I had to follow him, sat down and turned to business. That second, or a split second, which occurred there, that my answer in tone, not in words, but in tone, told him. Of course he expected, that I would say very politely and in a deferential way, yes, of course I know that they liberated us, they always did us. Anyway, I did not. I told shortly that I know very well, and the tone definitely clarified the case that I am not available as a quisling or as a military part of the Kadar gang.
All right. Now, the day before, or a few days before, Kadar had been successfully, Kadar made a very anti-Soviet speech, and the next day he popped up on their side.
Absolutely. Now, that's a Kadar mystery ever since. The case is that I even heard, I did not know it directly from Imre Nagy, but I heard that when Munich, who became prime minister, Munich was one of the typical Muscovites. This Munich went to Kadar and told him that the Soviet ambassador expects him to come to the embassy. Then Kadar, I am told, went to Imre Nagy and told her, I don't want to go. And supposedly, allegedly, I could never completely, so to say, document that exchange. Allegedly, Imre Nagy told him that there is no such thing. We must go with the Soviets. We must not provoke the Soviets. We must not make the Soviets suspicious, etc. Kadar, you should go. Now then, Kadar went to the Soviets. Whether this conversation is true or not, again, I heard with very reliable persons, but I don't have documents for it, so that we can accept it or we can disregard it. The important thing is that Kadar went to the Soviet embassy less than 48 hours after his speech, in which, among other things, he told, if once more the Soviet troops would come back, I will take a rifle and go down to the street and fight myself. In other words, it was one of the sharpest statements that Hungarians, including Kadar, were ready to fight if the Soviets once more will carry out an aggression. Now, within less than 48 hours, he's in the Soviet embassy. He's taken in a Soviet airplane out of Hungary and forms a government. Now, what happened here It is still a mystery, but there are very strong indications what might have happened. I believe the most important thing might have been twofold. One, that Farber might have been told by the Soviets, if you don't take it, we will bring back Marcus Rákosi or Gary. In other words, who was Rákos, Marcus and Gary? The typical suppressors of Hungarians who were Soviet agents, so to say, who were Muscovite, who came back to Hungary at the baggage train of the Soviet troops after at the last month of World War II, and who ruled Hungary up to practically the revolution of '56, but had nothing to do with the Hungarian people. Sentimentally or otherwise, they served the Soviet Union, not the Hungarian. Now, one thing might have been that Farber was told, if you don't take, these people will come back. The other thing might have been that I might have told him too that after Hungary will be, quote, pacified, end of quote. In other words, after the freedom fight, Stimulus government was completely suppressed by massive Soviet intervention, Farber will have the chance to realize some of the reform programs what he believed in and what Stimulus believed in.
All right. Now, wait. Stop right there. Just this encounter with Yuri Andropov on November the 2nd, 1956. General Kirai called this the most important day in his life, and I can easily understand why. General Kirai, if listeners just joined us, you are now in the Soviet embassy, November the 2nd, 1956, and Andropov is trying to charm you, you say, like a serpent. He's introducing you to his entire embassy staff. He is telling you that you're aware, of course, that the Soviet Union is the best friend of the Hungarians. There's one other thing that he told you, and as I say, this may be because I've seen too many war movies, but I got a strange interpretation of this after we spoke last Friday. Can you hear me, General?
Yes.
Okay, good. He said, no, there were no mobs sacking the embassy. Your Prime Minister, Imre Nagy of the Freedom Government, misunderstood. And then he went on to make up some story about two old Hungarian ladies who were bombed out of their apartment, and obviously a little bit mentally ill because they came by the Soviet embassy and they didn't know it was the Soviet embassy, and they said, gee, here's a nice building, but the ceilings are too high, it'd be too hard to heat, so we're not going to live here either. General, I think if you were Quisling material for a movie, the Quisling showed he was a Quisling by laughing at the misery of his, or the misery, the stupidity, the futility, the haplessness of his own people to the arrogant Nazi commander. Or in the case of the Far East, it was the Chinese sort of enjoying the suffering of a Chinese in the presence of a Japanese officer.
Right.
Now, maybe, I thought this was just Hollywood, but it may be real life. Andropov, an acid test of whether you were a potential Quisling or not. Maybe the best way for him to tell whether you would sell out is how you would react to that story. If you pretended to enjoy that story and laugh at two old Hungarian ladies who'd been bombed out and were stupid enough to think that they might come and live in the Soviet embassy if it weren't too. If you over-enjoyed that story, then that would be a good indication to Andropov that you were sort of subconsciously or not too subconsciously looking to identify yourself with the Soviets.
Absolutely. You have a very, very excellent psychological analysis of the whole thing, yes.
Okay. Now, we've told this much of the story. We may as well tell the rest of it. So Andropov then took you into his office, sat behind an oak desk, and the mask was off. He knew now that you were not a potential. It's like you can almost tell with a woman before you get to the end of cocktails on the first date how that relationship is going to go. You can tell what's in her heart.
Yes.
He could tell by your chill, by your correctness, that you were a Hungarian patriot, you were a freedom fighter, and you weren't looking for a good deal to be Minister of Defense in the Quisling government, right? So then he had to finish his game with you, which was as follows. He took you into his office and said...
And he told to me that, see, I sent a memorandum to Prime Minister Imre Nagy in which I informed him that the Soviet government wishes to have a high-level delegation appointed by the Hungarian government to meet a similarly high-level Soviet government delegation to discuss the withdrawal of the Soviet troops from Hungary. And he asked me, would you be kind enough to ask Imre Nagy whether he received this memorandum, and B, what is the response of the Hungarian government? And then I told him with great pleasure, and at that moment he might have seen on me that when I told with great pleasure, that was a sincere great pleasure, because that was on our mind, how to get rid of the Soviet troops, if possible, peacefully. So that he then asked me to dial number 1 in a special telephone. The special telephone connected members of the cabinet and Politburo members. In other words, I don't know, a few dozen of Hungarian top leaders.
Wait, forgive me, General, this is interesting. In other words, even with the technology of 1956,
yes,
if the Soviet ambassador in Hungary wanted to contact the Prime Minister of Hungary, all he had to do was pick up the phone on his desk and dial 1?
Number 1. That was all. That was all. Because all on this phone there were no, I don't know, not 12 or how many numbers. There were, I don't know, a few numbers, because only a few dozen of people were hooked up to this. But the interesting thing is that this system connected the top echelon of Hungarian leadership, but the Soviet ambassador was hooked up too. In other words, this ambassador, Yuri Andropov in Budapest, was not really an ambassador. He was a kind of governor general. He was a kind of pro-consul. He was a...
Colonial master.
Pardon?
Colonial master.
He was a colonial master. So that the title ambassador is totally misleading. He was a master of Hungary.
Okay.
Now,
yeah.
He asked me to dial number 1. I dialed number 1, and in a few seconds, really, Imre Nagy responded. I reported to him happily that there is nothing wrong about the Soviet embassy. No siege, no loot, no sacking occurred at all, contrary what Andropov claimed. But I told him, despite of all of this, I will put a much stronger defense system around the block where the Soviet embassy was located, because we did not want to give the Soviets an excuse that they were harassed or something. Now, and then I reported to him about the Soviet intention to start negotiation and asked him whether he received the memorandum, and his answer was in the positive. He told, yes, we received it, and he told, tell the ambassador that the written response is already on its way, and it is positive, and tell him also that from this afternoon, November the 2nd afternoon, the Hungarian delegation will be ready in the Hungarian parliament building to start the negotiations. And then Imre Nagy told me that please come back to my office, because you are a member of the delegation also. So that then Imre Nagy hung up, and I told the whole thing to Andropov, and he told very well, and we are in business. And then there were no more additional and unnecessary politeness, but he was still polite enough to escort me all the way to the gate, and like a diplomat. He could behave like a diplomat. Mm-hmm. But of course this was misleading. It was a mask. Behind the mask, behaving like a diplomat, he already have, of course, all the instructions about the invasion, which came in less than 48 hours.
In other words, Andropov knew that he was stalling for time, he was lying, he was deceiving you Hungarians into thinking that the Soviets wanted to evacuate Hungary peacefully, and meanwhile he knew that a ring of steel was about to be thrust around Hungary.
And there was still, a very interesting additional thing. I went back to Imre Nagy, and from there to my headquarters, and the first thing was that while in the memorandum what was sent at noon, the Soviets insisted the negotiations should start instantly. When we responded as we are ready to start, they began to delaying tactics again. only next day, November the 3rd. Why, of course, we don't have documentation, but my strong impression is that they thought that as a response to this false ultimatum what they sent, our military units were moving like lightning. We were instantly there around. In other words, the Soviets thought that we were in control. We were in control politically, we were in control in the streets, and we were in control of the armed forces. I believe that originally they might have started the invasion on November the 3rd. Mm-hmm. And then they decided, no, it must be postponed because they might shoot back, so to say. They might be better organized than we expected. So that then, first they insisted that the negotiations should start instantly on November the 2nd, and then they insisted, no, it should only start on this November the 3rd. The story which again is so characteristic to Yuri Andropov. At midnight of November the 3rd, the massive invasion of Hungary started by Soviet troops, I don't know, 16 divisions, 2,000 tanks, so that it was a massive military operation. And I started to receive the reports on the attacks from the Great Hungarian Plain, one town after the other reported. So half an hour after midnight, it was crystal clear that the Soviets launched a war against Hungary. I reported it every time when news came in to the Prime Minister. At approximately 1 o'clock, I told him, November the 4th, 1 o'clock after midnight, that Prime Minister, it is time to declare to the Hungarian people that we are in the state of war. If you don't want to make this announcement, authorize me to go to radio and make the announcement, because the troops are entitled to know and how to behave. Now here comes the tragical last act of the Hungarian Revolution. Imre told to me that among no circumstances will such a statement be done. We don't want a war with the Soviet Union, even a defensive war. But anyway, he said, Ambassador Andropov is here at my elbow, and he is assuring me that the Soviet government has no evil intention against Hungary. There is no such decision to invade Hungary. And it went on an hour later.
General, I'm sorry. The kind of firestorm that's so much more comfortable to sit out. Talk about the Academy Awards, talk about the Pennsylvania primary. Sorry, my conscience would never permit it. I must rise even without knowing if anybody, even the president, 3 or 4 days from now, will still be standing with me. I knew one day it would come to this. I wondered what it would be like when it came to this, and now it has come to this, and now I know. Since 1945, we have seen the Soviet Union expand, first just on its own borders. Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia were taken before breakfast. That was in 1940, before 1945. But after victory in World War II, Hungary, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, all of Eastern Europe, and then by long-distance tyranny implant into the Caribbean, Africa, Asia, Central America, we who choose to resist life the way it's lived behind the Iron Curtain have for a long time clamored for a strong Western awareness of and Western resistance to Soviet expansion. Now, if it's too much to ask for a unified Western resistance, you remember the West, Britain, France, Holland, Belgium, Norway, Denmark. If it's too much to ask for a Western attempt to stay free, then at least I wanted an American resistance, or an American attempt at resistance. Now, we mine layers are not all alike. Some of us were willing to watch the Soviets after World War II, hoping we could live peacefully together. Others wanted to declare war upon the Soviet Union right after World War II to eliminate the possibility of big dictatorships growing strong and trying to conquer others. Some of us mine layers rejoiced when American aircraft fed and fueled West Berlin over the heads of the Soviet blockaders. Our hotheads said that was insufficient. They wanted President Truman to send a tank column up the Autobahn to clear a path to West Berlin. We mine layers had our differences over Korea. Some of us were content to wind up with the communist target, South Korea, preserved. Not communist, free. Others wanted to make the Korean War something major and knock out Red China. Now, all of what I've said brings us only up to 1953. Since 1953, there's been very little for our side to disagree about. America and the West have exhibited no unity, no resistance, and not even much good lip service in the face of Soviet advances. There were many opportunities to do things. Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Cuba, Angola, Mozambique, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Afghanistan, and Korean Airlines Flight 007. By the way, where were the cries for the Hague Court? Back in those days, I thought the Hague Court went out of business with the League of Nations. Did we choose not to counter-move against Soviet interests because of the trauma of Vietnam? That was the big counter-move that went wrong? Or was the American paralysis there even before? When you're lying there in the hospital bed with your immune system inert, it doesn't matter whether your immune system dysfunction owes to your bad diet or your inadvisable sex habits. The important consideration is that America showed no serious intention to impede Soviet progress until President Ronald Reagan. The Soviet Union quite openly aids, arms, supplies, instructs, and propels armies that destabilize governments around the world in the name of Marxism and liberation. Those are Soviet weapons making the news and the noise from Syria to El Salvador. The Soviets openly armed their hitmen. They're that way, we say, when they arm their hitmen. But when America helps the Nicaraguan resistance plant some nuisance mines that kill nobody, aimed at making the merchant captains of the world think twice before delivering to Nicaragua, then, according to our press and our Congress, we've become as bad as the Soviets. Who says so? I'm sorry France won't go along. I didn't hear any French complaint when our mines and bombs and boys were being spent to liberate France. I'm sorry Britain won't go along. It's a pity the British have lost their knack for discerning the attention of aggressors with limitless arms. I'm sorry Senator Barry Goldwater is upset about not being informed. But we have long needed a leader who will face the world and say, resisting the aggressions of dictators is not stooping to their level. It is rising to the obligations of free people. And we, America, will therefore, from this moment forward, do at least as much to assist the forces of democracy as the Soviet Union is doing to assist the forces of totalitarian enslavement. If Nicaragua doesn't want its waters mined, all Nicaragua has to do, she'll have American as well as French minesweepers clearing her coastal waters. All Nicaragua has to do is quit shipping Soviet arms to the rebels of El Salvador.
Yes, Barry?
Yes.
Barry, this is Frank. Barry, it seems that the liberals in Congress, the liberal criminals that stabbed America in the back in Vietnam, once again are seeking to stab America's effort in the back in Central America. And when dealing with the Soviet entity, Barry, they seem to have a very short memory. For wasn't it but a few short months ago that that an airliner with United States civilians on it was blown out of the sky by Soviet thugs, and that they awarded a medal to this outlaw? Can't they see the lesson of history that the Soviets are a barbaric nation and must be dealt with the utmost brutality? They must be pushed back behind the Ural Mountains by bayonet point if need be. The Soviet Union, my friend, is
a pestiferous plague that threatens to pollute and poison the very bloodstream of the nation.
Sir, you and I feel alike. I'm a little bit better mannered than you are. I mean, believe me, at the Kiwanis Club in Gaffney, South Carolina, I'd go over better than you do because I'm calm and I'm Southern and I'm languid and I'm liquid and everything, and you're angry and mean and everything. But, all right, you and I feel alike. But don't you understand what the media has done? Have you watched the network newscasts last night? I say last night, meaning Tuesday night. Don't you see the firestorm they have unleashed? Don't you see the impossibility of John or Jane Doe at tomorrow night's dinner party saying, I think we should support the anti-communists in Nicaragua. They are blowing us away. They've got a media blitz on. I've got late night radio, and I've got you, and we have each other, and there are a couple other lights flashing. But do you see what the big boys are doing?
Well, you know, Barry, these are the media criminals. And it's the same media criminals that were responsible for America's stab in the back in Vietnam. But I do not think that the American people are paralyzed by the Vietnam syndrome. These are media reactionaries who long for those days of Vietnam. But remember, Barry, as we speak at the same instance as we recall the Vietnam paralysis, our friends in the peace-loving People's Republic of China are waging an heroic struggle in defense of their borders against these same Vietnamese revanchist hyenas.
Okay, thank you very much. Today is a very important day because this is the day we join the issue. This is the day where they say to us, how dare you mine the harbors of countries, and that's an act of war and it's in violation of international law, and you won't go to the... No, I'm sorry. This is where we say to them, what about the introduction of massive Soviet arms to this hemisphere? Are you only complaining about air mining of the harbors? Where's your complaint about the Soviet infusion of arms into Central America? We better get up and say that now because no major media is saying it, no major politician is saying it. Welcome.
I want to thank you. You've galvanized Frank. You've got him out of there somewhere. I'm glad to hear him back on the air. I agree with everything you're saying. I want to say something. I don't know if Nikolai Lenin was a visionary or just a lucky guesser when he spoke about the useful idiot syndrome and how that if we could more or less corrupt the students or the journalists or both, someday they could control America. Well, we've got a lot of sympathetic dupes and stooges in our Congress and media, and I don't know if they're so craven to cut the president's throat or they're that craven opportunists to want to get a Democrat back in the White House that they don't sense their loss of liberty, your loss, and mine. I find it more than symbolic. I find it almost coincidental to the point that the Soviet ship was exploded on almost a month ago. Nobody said anything. Now, since the Senate has passed the aid bill to Central America and it's going to the House, I think they wanted to shirk their responsibility and hide their cowardness to the American public. And this was fine-tuned to bring this Nicaraguan stooge up here and all the sanctimonious hypocrites in the media with this alleged United States said they were doing this and that for this. I do not believe the presidential election should be determined in the media or in Moscow. I want that carved in stone. I want that shipped to the congressmen. I want the prima donnas and the airheads and the blow dries and everybody on the evening news to know I am opposed. I want to thank you for running this. I've been climbing walls for 2 days with this constant harangue of guilt and a neurosis that pervades the media. I think we have the implicit right to destabilize any totalitarian regime on behalf of those citizens imprisoned under that regime.
I just say let us do as much for the forces of democracy as the Soviet Union does for the forces of enslavement, whether Teddy Kennedy likes it or not.
This book, Why Are They Lying to Our Children, is based on an attempt to balance the record of human achievement, to give people some insight into some of the misguided notions that are presently being disseminated in our schools.
So all this television time about the textbooks, about evolution versus create, that's really a wasted, that draws our attention away from the real textbook thing.
Let me give you some illustrations of what I'm referring to. We will read in textbooks, our children read in textbooks, that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. This is repeated time and again so often that it's become a cliche. However, if one were to look at the development of the so-called rich part of the world and the so-called poor part of the world, you will find that the rich are getting richer, and the poor are getting richer, and the poor are getting richer at a faster pace than the rich are getting richer. And in fact, it's undeniable because the Western nations in the world have grown at a pace of about 350% in the aggregate from 1960 to 1980, but the so-called developing world has grown at about 1,100%. Now, if you look at the absolute numbers, you would be deceived. It would appear as if the gap is widening. But if you look at the relative numbers, it's quite obvious that something very significant is happening in the developing world. Let me give you a second illustration. We are often told that people in the West eat these junk foods, hamburgers and French fried potatoes and other junk foods that are having a pernicious effect on our health. In 1940, the average lifespan for an American was about 50 years old. In 1984, it is 73 for a male and almost 80 years old for a female. Obviously, something is happening in our culture that suggests we can extend life expectancy.
I'm Barry Farber, and I am an assiduous reader of Dr. Herbert London's brilliant column in the New York Tribune. Right over the nerve centers and the bullseyes in American life, and drops his, not bombs, but flares, illumination.
What inaccurate is that the message is a little more subtle. What is happening in the textbooks today tends to reflect what is happening in the general cultural environment of this country. There is an anti-technological bias. One will read in the textbooks that one of the terrible things that's happened in urban areas in America is that we live with traffic jams. Very rarely do you have a textbook author who points out we live in an age of such mass consumption that so many people can own automobiles.
Yeah.
We read in our textbooks about the impoverishment, starvation that exists in the world, and one reads about a Malthusian scenario where population outstrips food supply. At no point do we read that it is not food supply because we have more than enough food to feed the people of the world. It's the fact that it is not distributed properly, that there are political reasons for this, that it has nothing at all to do with the food we grow. In fact, we spend $22 billion a year in subventions to farmers to stop them from growing food. Now, these are the kinds of arguments that are not made. What I am suggesting to you is that if you were to take a cumulative look at textbooks in America, one is left with the impression that the technological advances that this country has been responsible for in this century have not had a salutary effect on the population. One is left with the impression that the great strides that we have made in science have not benefited mankind. For example, one will read in the textbooks, and this is fairly routine in the textbooks, that if you were to look at environmental questions in America, and the environmental conditions are deteriorating. However, since the Clean Air Act of the mid-1960s, sulfur dioxide levels, carbon monoxide levels in every major urban center in the United States have improved dramatically. You don't read that story, and you don't read that story in our textbooks primarily because there is a gloomy picture painted about our scientific advances. Let me cite another illustration to you that I think would be probably fascinating to your listeners. In the 1960s, Paul Ehrlich wrote a book called The Population Explosion. In that book, he described a world where the world's population would double every 30 years because the birth rate worldwide was something on the order of 2.1%. What the textbook writers do not point out today is that that number, that world birth rate, has been declining very dramatically since 1965, so that it is now at a level of about 1.7, with even UN statistics suggesting that by the end of this century, it'll be close to 1.3. Now, we are declining worldwide in population, yet the textbooks don't suggest that. They still rely on figures from the 1960s, even those books that are published last year. Now, there's a reason for it, and the reason has something to do with the kind of cultural ambiance in which we find ourselves. Bad news is what's newsworthy. And both the writers of textbooks as well as the people who appear in the media know that, and they have learned that lesson. And it is a very unfair interpretation of what's happening in contemporary life today. On the other hand, it is also interesting to note in a marvelous book that was done by Stan Rothman and Bob Lichter that if you were to examine the political views of journalists in America today, about 92% of them voted for McGovern in the 1972 election. Now, 92%, when McGovern got something on the order of 40% of the American vote, clearly suggests that there is a liberal bias in the press. And the problem that you have is not that people in the press are necessarily involved in stacking the record, but that they are acting according to their own predilections.
There's something non-sinister about this if they tell Mr. Rothman, Dr. Rothman and Dr. Lichter, as long as they own up to it, then the right-wing kooks are wrong. It is not a Soviet conspiracy inside our press. Otherwise, remember that marvelous moment? I hope you liked The Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming. It was back 20 years ago with Alan Arkin, Theo Bakel, the Soviet submarine commander stuck in a little New England town, remember? Anyhow, the funniest scene was when the Russian party roamed up and down the beach in New England, and they were apprehended by some tourists, and Alan Arkin said, "We're Norwegians." I mean, I happen to know a little bit about Norwegians and a little bit about Russians, and of course, I howled. The idea of Alan Arkin saying in that perfect Russian accent, "We're Norwegians," was to me the funniest bit in the whole movie. If these people who voted for McGovern and felt the McGovern way in 1972, filling out a questionnaire knowing full well how that questionnaire is going to be used, knowing full well that the Herb Londons and I and everybody on our side is going to wave that in the air like a battle flag, like the Confederate flag at the Clemson game. You know, we're going to brandish that forevermore, in spite of the fact that they knew that. They didn't, the McGovern people didn't say, "I was always for Reagan," so as to ruin our little expose. Look here, who they are, who controls them. I got to congratulate them for being honest.
Well, I can congratulate them, too. And I don't want to give you the impression that I'm engaged in some sort of campaign. If there is a campaign with the media that I am engaged in, it's what I think anyone would probably support, and that's a truth in advertising claim. I don't care what people say as long as I know where they stand. If you choose to take a liberal position, then call it that. Call it a liberal position. Tell me what your position is on public matters. Let me know where you stand on the issues. And if that is a position that you take, then I can judge for myself whether, in fact, it's simply a personal expression or it's a dispassionate interpretation of the news. What I object to are those people who try to tell us this is the truth, when in fact they represent a certain ideological point of view. It's not the ideology that I object to. It is only the fact that one confuses that with a dispassionate interpretation of the facts. Out in this book, Why Are They Lying to Our Children, is indeed the manipulation of young people who have not formulated either political or cultural views of their own, and who are led to believe that the world is going to hell in a handbasket. I can assure young people who are reasonably healthy, living in the land of the free, where there are still great technical advances taking place every day, that there are great opportunities for success.
Some wise guy once said Fidel Castro's fantasy is to walk into a nightclub and see a Jewish orchestra and Spanish-speaking people dancing. When we get back together, I can't help Fidel there. I'll tell you about the night I crept up on the blind side of a communist. First, double in peace. If you want something done, ask a busy man. Dr. London is head of the Gallatin Division of NYU. He's a major officer. I'm looking for the exact title in the spirit of good education and good precision. What's your title with the Hudson Institute?
I'm a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute.
All right. And he writes newspaper columns, brilliant ones, and writes brilliant, worthwhile books, including the one in my hand right now entitled Why Are They Lying to Our Children? And I see him on TV, and I see him quoted, and it gives me a lot of joy, because I remember we had conversations, and they felt very lonely back in the year 1970. That was the date of our first one. Anyhow, the Gallatin Division has some interesting evenings. They advertised one evening with Claire Sterling, the world's leading expert on terrorism, the woman with the evidence in linking the late Yuri Andropov to the assassination attempt on the Pope. And I came to that evening, and fortunately for mankind, I came late. And I came in, sneaked into the back of the room. And we, if you talk about commies breaking up meetings, go hide on it. Go back to your John Birch Society. Well, let me tell you about this. I was sitting with Richard Grenier. Oh, I owe him a phone call. His wife invited me to a movie. I never even returned the call. Richard Grenier, the man who told us the man who gave us the real story about Gandhi. Did you read that piece on
I did indeed.
Wow.
Marvelous piece.
I mean, I'm afraid to go see the movie now. I'm really afraid, because some people don't want to read Richard Grenier having seen the movie for fear it'll ruin their experience at enjoying that movie. I'm afraid if I go see that movie, it'll ruin my enjoyment of Richard Grenier's article about the real Gandhi, who bore little or no resemblance to the Gandhi up there on the screen. Yeah, I came in late, and we were leaning up against the table, and Dr. Herbert London introduced Claire Sterling, and she was brilliant and went over the same material I'd heard on my own broadcast, but I don't remember all the details, and I really wanted to start remembering the names and the dates and the Bulgarians and the Adja and the setup. You think Paul Newman did a good job in The Sting by setting people up and building a well, you ought to see the job the KGB did setting up the right wing. Adja was a member of the right wing of whatever it was, not the left wing. The right wing. Now, ask what a right-wing terrorist is doing as a guest in Bulgaria. You got me. I can't answer that. But anyhow, Claire was building that whole picture, and then it came time for questions. The second question was a hostile, the kind of question in matrimonial law they call it calculated to incense. He was just trying to rain on Claire Sterling's parade and dump on her and sow doubt and confusion and opposition and consternation. And I recognized the voice. Then I really recognized the voice. That's my buddy. I have one communist. I asked, and I invited communists to step forward on one occasion. He came forward. He's been on 4 or 5 of my broadcasts. He won't give me his phone number, and I respect that. But he calls me every once in a while when I'm in the mood. I have him on. I think I had him on since then. But I recognized him as not just somebody of left-wing views, not just somebody of communist views, but an out-and-out active, self-proclaimed communist. Don't you call me McCarthyite, you shallow thinker out there. I'm talking now about a self-proclaimed communist. That's beyond the bounds of McCarthyism. And I wrote Dr. London a little note to that effect, but it was so interesting for me to see the tactics of the 1930s. They had a department for that. They called it agitprop, agitation and propaganda. And there's an assignment. If you're a communist, your assignment is to go to meetings at the Gallatin Division of NYU when people like Claire Sterling are nailing down the evidence for one and all to behold, linking Andropov and the KGB with the assassination attempt on the... And their job is to sow doubt. Their job is to break up the parade. And it was just so interesting. Like, it's interesting for me to see a little crocus bloom the way it does in the textbook. Interesting for me to see a little moth come out of a cocoon. Interesting for me to see a hen cackle. And there's an egg. There's an egg. Miracle right there. It's fun to see these things you know about. And it was also that same kind of fun for me to see a communist try to break up a meeting where the information was inconvenient to the Kremlin.
Well, he may have tried, but the purpose of an educational institution is to try and give everyone an opportunity to express his or her views. We live in an era where it's sometimes difficult to do that because issues that are laden with passion are, of course, discussed very passionately, and people want to dominate the forum for the exchange of ideas. However, as an educator who believes that different points of view have to be respected, I obviously try to intervene and control him. I should also point out that what I'm doing in this book is to control those people who are only interested in one side of the issue. My detractors will say that Herb London is a Pollyannish optimist. Well, let me assure you, the only reason why I seem like a Pollyannish optimist about this country is because in a world of manic pessimism, my realism seems like manic optimism.
Yeah, that's
and my feeling is that the only way in which we can look at the American society is to try and be realistic about both our promise as well as our problems. And indeed, there are problems. But we have to present our children with an interpretation of what's going on in America that gives them a sense that there is hope and promise in this land, because indeed there is.
Wait, I want to buy a broader car just to get that whole thing you said on the bumper sticker. Wait a minute. I am accused of being a Pollyanna optimist. It's just that in a world of manic pessimism, my realism
seems like manic optimism.
Well, I think about 2 or 3 feet wider than my present one, but I think it's worth it for mankind. Yeah.
There's no question that my views tend to be minority views on a university today, because the student radical of the 1960s is now a tenured professor. He is the professor who is on the major committees. He controls the curriculum. It's no coincidence that at my own university, for example, a sociologist and a psychologist now give a course on nuclear weapons, and the course is designed to stop the spread of nuclear weapons by having our students engage in forms of social activism. Well, I'm not opposed to courses on nuclear weapons, but I would like our students to understand why we have them, why they exist, why they can't be disinvented, why, in fact, a credible deterrent is so necessary for the maintenance of world peace. I'm not opposed to students advocating any position they'd like, but I'd hate to think that our courses have become efforts at proselytizing.
Come on this broadcast, I will provide a copy of Why Are They Lying to Our Children by Dr. London, Dr. Herbert I. London, forward by Herman Kahn. That may have been the last thing he wrote.
It was indeed. Sorry to say, Herman died about 2 weeks before this forward was written.
Before the forward was written?
No, I'm sorry. He died about 2 weeks after the forward was written.
Awful. Meanwhile, let's go to No News and our good friend Les Kinsolving. Les.
Headlined, "The Girl Stood on the Burning Deck and Froze." The big media have widely reported the case of the Naval Academy's midshipman, Jacqueline Davis of Chicago. She's the one who refused to jump off a 34-foot tower into a swimming pool, which drill approximates what you have to do in abandoning ship. 5 other midshipmen in the past decade have been expelled for refusing to jump, but not Miss Davis, who says she isn't going to sea anyway. That's a $100,000 naval education we're providing her as taxpayers. What the big media has not reported is the intervention of the Annapolis area NAACP, which Miss Davis insists is not because she's black, but because, in her words, they are defending my phobia. The NAACP, that is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored Phobia. Another thing the big media have not reported is that 2 days after Admiral Charles Larson, the superintendent, reinstated this woman, he received and had to accept the resignation from the Academy of her roommate, another midshipman who is pregnant. How would Admirals Farragut Halsey and John Paul Jones react to this and the Naval Academy program to produce hydrophobic naval officers?
Well, I'm sorry they left it to me. I wish they had done it themselves. They had the responsibility. They had the knowledge. They didn't say it. They're not saying it now. They're whispering it. I'm going to say it. Now then, we have a bizarre situation. It really is 1984. It is not just on the top of the newspaper for fun, for jokes, for chronology. It is 1984 in some very meaningful ways. I have watched carefully all the coverage, the TV coverage, particularly from Nicaragua, about the mining of the harbors, about the blowing up of the gasoline tanks at Corinto. And if I had just come to the planet Earth from another planet and just started looking at the American media, I would conclude that the world is peaceful, everything is normal, all systems are go. I mean, really the world is A-OK. But all of a sudden an evil man named Reagan and some cancerous organization called the CIA decides all of a sudden to send speedboats behind South Korean freighters to blow up gasoline tanks in peace-loving harbors and to mine harbors. In other words, we all know about certain sexual fetishes. Apparently the president has a sexual fetish we never heard of. On clear sunny days, he just loves to mine Nicaraguan harbors. Nowhere do we get, some places we get a whisper, but nowhere do we get the story in bold-faced context. Nicaragua is indeed beset with difficulty. American-originated difficulty, CIA-inspired and induced difficulty. But what you don't read is that Nicaragua can relieve itself easier than you can, easier than I can. I've got problems. I wish I could get rid of them this easily. All Nicaragua has to do is quit transshipping Soviet weapons to the forces in El Salvador trying to overthrow the government in the name of communist Karl Marx. That's all they've got to. Don't you wish Poland could be free and live its national life that simply by quitting sending illegal arms for murderous purposes to a neighbor? Don't you wish Hungary could live its national life, be free and independent merely by quitting sending arms to overthrow a neighboring government? Wouldn't it be great if we could all live in peace just by quitting the transshipping of arms to another state? Nicaragua is in trouble. I'm sorry. I think Nicaragua deserves to be in trouble. I salute the CIA for and by the way, in American, not Albanian, not Soviet Russian, not Communist Chinese, not Bulgarian, Polish, East German, Czechoslovak, in American newscasts, and I listened carefully and I listened clinically because I knew I was going to be here tonight on a live microphone. You get the impression that the CIA mined the harbors. The CIA blew up the gas tanks. That's not even alleged, only by the over-bloated, dyspeptic American media. The CIA is not even accused of mining harbors. The CIA is accused, rightly, and if I were the CIA, I'd say thank you proudly, of helping those in Nicaragua who want a democracy and those in El Salvador who do not want a communist dictatorship. The CIA is accused of helping from a mothership outside the 3-mile limit, helping Nicaraguans in El Salvador. Oh, no, you don't get that. The CIA mined the harbors. The CIA blew up the tanks. Now, if our media is not going to tell us that, I don't think the Bulgarians are. I don't think the Romanians, the Hungarians, the Czechs, the East Germans, I don't think the Soviets or the Chinese are. Maybe we have to tell each other. The Nicaraguan difficulty is eminently deserved. I'm going to forget the hypocrisy of the squealing senators because that has been amply covered. What I thought had been non-amply covered is what we just covered. Hearing with a naked ear, pure heart, innocence. You get the impression that everything is calm and peaceful and the CIA starts mining harbors and blowing up gas tanks. That's what, not the CIA guides and advises and sits offshore and helps, like the Soviets have traditionally done for their surrogates seeking to destabilize non-communist regimes, but you hear the CIA is doing it. I don't doubt that the CIA is helping, and I wish the CIA would help more effectively aid every single person in the world seeking to overthrow dictatorship. Now, the media is thundering. The rest of us are gurgling and gargling and gagging.
A nice package of many media things, but the only truth is appearing in the press. Today, in the Wall Street Journal, did you catch the story about Comandante, the 10 congressmen, led by Jim Watt, Stephen Solars, and my congressman over here, Torricelli? They sent an apology letter to Mr. Ortega, disavowing the president's policies in Central America. And this is a policy, Barry, that the House and Congress had voted and the president signed. And tonight on PBS, Newt Gingrich, a congressman from Georgia, debated Stephen, liberal, limp-wristed Solars. I have to remind people, the Bible says, blessed are the peacemakers. These people never proclaim to be peacemakers. They talk about peace. And behind every peace, like they used to say, under every bed was a communist in the 50s, well, behind every person yelling peace, I usually see a hidden agenda. Do you know what I'm talking about? They may carry little papier-mâché MX missiles or Pershings and crews, and they may talk about peace and dialogue, as Mr. Jackson talks about, let's have a dialogue with the PLO, and let's have a dialogue with the Kremlin. That's sellout talk to me. That's all the ethnic groups. There is a common bond, Barry, between your audience and you that nobody in New York City has. Even Bob Grant, he gets stuck with a lot of the I hate to say this, I'm sexist to housewives, and they don't like to talk politics.
You're encouraging words.
Please, tell your readers, New York Tribune, New York Post, and Wall Street Journal, that's a 1, 2, 3 count. They can counter that entire liberal left, apologist, neutralist, pacifist, communist media. Okay,
Don't get emotional. They're not emotional. They are measured, and that's why they're scoring the points. Let us take a deep breath and be measured too, Bruce. At last, we have a president who's doing that. Now, if you had asked me before Ronald Reagan was elected, Barry, what will happen if the president of the United States does things to inconvenience the communists? I mean, suppose the CIA, and suppose you'd made up some wild fantasy. Suppose you'd said, suppose the CIA helps put mines. They don't blow up ships, but they scare ships. They alert people that we mean business. Maybe the next mines will be real mines and not just nuisance mines. Suppose the CIA guides patriots from onshore, in this case Nicaragua, to take speedboats and go ashore and blow up gasoline tanks. What will happen? I could have called it exactly. Why didn't they have a lottery to see who could guess the reaction? I'd be a millionaire. It was easy to guess. The liberal media would go absolutely berserk, insane, politicians too, and those of us who vaguely somehow feel that we should be doing something to help the non-communist side, as the Soviet Union is doing everything to help the communist side, they would get weak in the knees because of the media, not the Soviet media, the American media reaction, because of the American politicians on that side. Our side would sort of go and blush and look down at its shoes and sort of feel in its heart that we should be helping the forces of freedom in those countries. But wow, look what happens when we do. Look at the riptide. How easily shaken are you? I am impossible to shake. I am proud of our president. I am proud of our CIA. I think it is high time we did at least as much to aid the forces of freedom as they are doing to aid the forces of totalitarian communist aggression. Liberal neighbor says, Barry, El Salvador is not free. The Nicaraguan Contras, in many cases, were henchmen of the infamous Somoza. Are you going to have the brains to stand up and say, well, wait a minute, you heard of World War II, it was in all the papers. You were against the late Adolf Hitler, were you not? Uh-huh. Well, the Greek leader was a dictator named Metaxas. The Polish leader was a dictator named Pilsudski. Did that keep us from sympathizing and trying to help Greece and Poland? Of course not. It's aggressor versus victim. Nicaragua is serving as a surrogate of the aggressor. Cuba serving as a cat's paw of the aggressive Soviet Union. The Nicaraguan freedom fighters, how do they keep their heart after hearing the debate in this country? The government of El Salvador is a non-communist government trying to defend itself. Please don't feel like a war. They want you to, but don't feel like a war criminal because you favor their victory.
Mr. Farber, I am a 24-carat friend of the freedom-loving Sandinista movement, the glorious Sandinista movement.
You're putting me on, but go ahead.
No, Mr. Farber, I must say that the Sandinista movement, I think, started way before there was any communist inspiration in Central America. However, as you probably know, we have the government of the great late gentleman in that country, which met a very violent death in Paraguay, and thank God he did. And we are also talking about the great late rulers of El Salvador, which will meet a great death in some other country, and the great late rulers of Honduras and
Look, pal, there are talk show hosts who will put up with this. There are talk show hosts who say, tell me what's on your mind, and they'll sit back and they'll do their toenails and they'll talk to their girlfriends and they'll do crossword puzzles. Forgive me for talking while you're interrupting, and they'll sip coffee. I am not going to sit here and let my beautiful broadcast be a pawn for somebody who is either venal enough or stupid enough to rhapsodize the Sandinista movement.
Now, we all hate Somoza. We all hate dictators. I think the only honest opinion of the Sandinistas, yours I accuse of being dishonest or irretrievably dumb, the only honest reaction to the Sandinistas is, damn it, there goes another rubber tree plant. There goes another possibility to install democracy when a Latin American dictatorship tumbles. And just like Castro, the Sandinistas blew it. Instead of a democracy, they have a Marxist dictatorship. Now, I do feel a little bit like a war criminal not letting you finish your beautiful love letter to the Sandinistas. As a matter of fact, I haven't pushed a button on you. We're still connected. But I am ashamed, sir, that I have to sit here and earn my living entertaining the likes of you. I think you are not wrong. I think you are wretchedly wrong, perhaps venally wrong, and evilly wrong. At best, sir, you are a political cipher.
The liberals... The liberals just think that everybody has polished nails and goes to the beauty parlor and lives in a country like ours where they can say and do anything they want. They don't realize what's going on in the rest of the world. I think when Jesse Jackson was in Syria, I wanted to vomit at what was going on because he made Assad look like some middle-level executive.
Mr. Farber, I totally agree with the CIA man in the Nicaraguan powers.
Oh, wait, let me tell you what interests me about you. You have your English is much too good to come from America. You have an island accent. Am I correct?
Yes, you are. We spoke some time ago.
Where are you? Which island are you from?
I'm from Grenada.
You're from Grenada, really?
Yep, I'm from Grenada, and definitely, and I can't even find a word to describe the American press because I was in Barbados just before, a couple days before, and during the time that the Americans went in to liberate Grenada.
So you are not a member of the New Jewel movement.
The New Jewel movement was a catastrophe. I don't want to talk about it, really.
Tell me more about your... I haven't talked to anybody from Grenada. You're my first. Go ahead.
No, with senators in this country, I could understand why lots of people are so naive in this country as to what is in America's best interest. And the only time most people in this country would realize what a free country they have is when they have lost it.
Absolutely. You lost your country for a while. Have you been back to Grenada since the liberation?
No. Unfortunately, I had to come back here before that I cut off.
The liberals did not like our liberation of Grenada until they learned that 98% of your people, which is probably a higher percentage than the population of France after we invaded Normandy, who approved of the action, you are from a country that suffered communist tyranny and was liberated from it. What do you hear from your countrymen in that regard?
I haven't met a Grenadian who was in Grenada at the time who did not like what the Americans did in Grenada. Grenadians are saying that Grenada was liberated. Only American press and people who are hypocritical of seeing people being free is saying it's an invasion. They are saying it's an invasion. In fact, when I told people that Cubans was training Grenadians to overthrow the Grenadian government, they laughed at me. That was in August of 1978. I said to a senator whose name I would not mention now, but he's a senator from Ohio. I said to him, if you think that the money that I'm talking about now is money, wait until the Cubans and the Russians get entrenched in the Caribbean, and then you're going to see how much money you're going to have to spend military to protect what you call in your backyard.
On with helping. What the news on NBC tonight was like it was from the government in Managua. They portray the CIA as war criminals, America as Nazi Germany, Nicaragua as a small Denmark or Belgium or Norway or Holland, and we're blowing up their gas tanks, and they have to evacuate 4,000 people. Victim. Where is the awareness that all Nicaragua has to do to get relief is quit transshipping Soviet arms to the communist rebels of El Salvador?
I'm Barry Farber. Let me take a personal detour right here. This is the kind of
friendship that just doesn't happen anymore. It just sounds outmoded. I had a torpy little hobby when I was a teenager in the middle of North Carolina. It was a very odd hobby. I studied Chinese. Had a pitiful little book that my mother brought me down from Baltimore. And there were no cassettes or tape recorders in those days. We couldn't get the sound of the Chinese characters. All you could do was try to guess the way they were supposed to be pronounced from those little marks and notes in the book. And I had been studying Chinese, I guess, about 3 months, and we went to Miami Beach. We took the train from North Carolina. It was 1944. It was during wartime. And we got off the train and took a cab to the hotel, and we passed a bunch of sailors. And they were marching. Well, there was nothing unusual about sailors marching in port cities in 1944, so I was the only one who noticed. The first sailor we passed, out of hundreds of them marching, looked Chinese. And then I noticed the one beside him looked Chinese. And then I noticed that every single sailor in that whole rank looked Chinese. And then I noticed every single sailor in the next rank looked Chinese. Every single one of those 900 sailors was Chinese. We got to the hotel, and the hotel clerk didn't seem the least bit excited. He said, yes, the Chinese Nationalist Navy has about 1,000 sailors here in Miami training at the Hotel Alcazar, 1944. Well, no prospector in Africa in the Kimberley area could have ever been as thrilled as I was if he had found 800 big diamonds right there on the ground waiting for him. Here, yesterday, North Carolina and a little book with no idea of how to pronounce those Chinese words. And today, 900 Chinese sailors. I gave Grandma and Grandpa the quickest kiss they'd ever gotten and ran right back to where we'd seen those Chinese sailors. And I caught up with them in Bayfront Park. And I waved my ridiculous little book. And I said, in what I hoped was Chinese, I said, can any of you teach me how to pronounce these characters? Well, there were a lot of volunteers. They all flocked around a little torpy American teenager trying to learn Chinese. The Chinese sailors loved it. I became their mascot. And there was one sailor above all who took a special interest. We met regularly. We had appointments. After his training, I'd meet him in the park. He came over and met my parents and my grandparents, and he became my Chinese big brother. And when I had to leave Florida, his name was Fan Tung Shi. Fan Tung Shi. And I stayed there the whole summer. And, when a child, 14, is that highly motivated, it becomes like clinical insanity. I just did nothing but study Chinese. By the end of the summer, I could speak Chinese as a teenager because of Fan Tung Shi, this Chinese sailor who befriended me. He was about 10 years older than I was. And I had to go over and say goodbye to him. I was going back to North Carolina. He said, let us write each other a letter every week. Let us write an English letter and a Chinese letter, 2 letters in the same envelope. And you will correct my Chinese, or you will correct my English, and I will correct your Chinese. Well, we did that. And then we won. We won World War II, and they went back to China. And we carried on this correspondence for 5 years. That's a lot. That's a pretty good pen-pal relationship if you've ever tried to sustain one. And in 1949, the communists took over the mainland, and the letters quit coming from Fan Tung Shi. And I figured, dear me, I just wondered an awful lot. Did he die in combat against the communists? Was he a prisoner? Was he in some labor camp? Was he a former enemy who was now allowed some kind of marginal existence in the new communist China? Was he a last-minute turncoat who suddenly joined the communist side and found favor with them and was sort of okay? He couldn't have made it to Taiwan. He would have written me. And I wondered and wondered and wondered what happened to Fan Tung Shi. I started wondering back there in 1949. having met him in 1944 and corresponded with him from 1944 to 1949. Everybody in my life realized that if there were a fire in our home, the first thing he or she should grab and run out with to safety was the stack of Chinese and English letters from Fan Tung Shi, my Chinese sailor friend. I'd show them off to every Chinese visitor who came to our home, and I'd have that Chinese visitor help me wonder, where is he? What could have happened to him? There are a billion Chinese. Where is Fan Tung Shi? What are the chances that he's alive? What are the chances that he's on the mainland? What are the chances that he got away? Well, as so often happens in life, if I'd spent less time wondering and more time finding out, I wouldn't have had to wait 40 years. In 1983, in Taiwan, I asked the newspaper to help me. I didn't mention Fan Tung Shi's name because I figured if he were in the mainland, it would not help him to have his name published in the Taiwan press, and here's a young American pen pal looking for him. That could not help him. It could definitely harm him. So what I asked the Taiwan newspaper to do was help me find any of the 900 Chinese sailors who were there, figuring if I found one, I could trace, does he know somebody? Does he know somebody? Does he know somebody? Can I find Fan Tung Shi? Well, they did that. And yesterday, I got a telephone call in good, clear English. Hello, Barry. This is Fan Tung Shi. Hadn't seen him in 40 years. 4-0. This is Fan Tung Shi. He saw the article, and he knew that I was protecting him by not mentioning his name, and he tracked me down through the newspaper. And he was in Dallas, Texas, visiting his children and grandchildren. He had indeed made it to Taiwan safely. Why hadn't he written me? Because he lost my address when I moved in North Carolina. Nothing more sinister than that. He was in Dallas visiting his children and grandchildren, and he said, Barry, are you going to be in New York tomorrow? I said, yes. He said, I got to go back to Taiwan tomorrow night, but if you're going to be in New York, I'm going to come to New York and have lunch with you. Fan Tung Shi, having known me at the age of 14, got on a plane in Dallas, Texas, and flew to New York City today for a 3-hour meeting. Well, he is prosperous. He made it. His family, his mother and father and brother, alas, starved to death under communism in China. He's in import-export, and because Taiwan may have internal revenue agents, I'm not going to tell them how well I know he is doing, because he showed me some letters of credit from American corporations.
When you say his family starved to death, you mean as free citizens?
Oh, yeah.
Or you mean in jail?
No, not in jail. There was a big famine. Communist China does not know how to distribute food too well, and they knew even less well back in the 60s when they did starve to death his mother and father and his son, his brother. He, however, stayed in the Chinese Navy until 1968, retired a full captain, and went into that import-export business. And, Chinese very frequently get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and do these Tai Chi exercises, and it really works. He looked like my big brother in 1944, but I look like his big brother now because he's in such great shape. We promised to start writing again. Now, I'm sure you can top that. I'm sure if we try hard enough, we can find other people who haven't seen each other for 40 years. Maybe you can make it 41 years. Maybe you can make it 45 years. Maybe you can find somebody who can do it for 50 years. But I'll bet you'll never top me in the thrill power of seeing my beloved Fan Tung Shi. Go a little bit deeper with you. On the network news, we were seeing an airdrop, actual pictures of an airdrop by parachute of aid, supplies, weapons to the Nicaraguan Contras. And I had the feeling in the narration, that Miss Sheridan in the 8th grade had caught me chewing gum during algebra and was celebrating a detailed secret videotaping of that event before the entire 8th grade. Look at him, he's putting it in his mouth. Look at him, he's chewing. Look at him, he's trying to slip it under his tongue. It was a total accusatory piece, and it was very banal propaganda. What it purported to show was how aghast we should all be that we, through our CIA, are trying to arm Nicaraguan Contras. And he, I could tell by his narration, expected the nation to explode in harmony with his indignation against American aid of the Nicaraguan Contras. Have you read or heard or seen one single compliment to the process in El Salvador? Did you see one single person do a knee bend on television and say, we've got to hand it to those people of El Salvador? Maybe I, in my American media ivory tower, want communism for the people of El Salvador, long blighted by an oppressive oligarchy and long-needing land. Maybe but I got to admit, folks, have you heard this lately? In the past 24 hours, I got to admit, folks, the people of El Salvador in election after election after election are turning out unafraid in greater numbers, and they're voting. I've seen more computer terminals used in voting in the El Salvador election than I ever saw in the American South. What do you do to win a compliment in this town? What do you do to win a point in this media? What do you do when you're a struggling democracy with neighbors sending guns brazenly, postmarked Soviet Union, through their territory into yours, into the hands of people massing to overthrow you? And in the midst of those conditions, which a mature democracy like Britain and America could be congratulated for having elections under, in the middle of that shaky situation, you go ahead and you pull off 3 elections in a row, and they get progressively better and better. They're better elections. Each of the last 3 elections in El Salvador, forget who won, they have been better elections, more turnout, more orderly, less intimidation, less ballot. Well, they voted. All they lack so far is their compliment from the United States of America. At least the media of the United States of America. I congratulate them. No news you hear only here. Coming up right now, Lester Kinsolving.
This afternoon refused to confirm or deny that President Reagan has a black amnesty program. During the daily news briefing, Deputy White House spokesman Pete Roussel was asked about the Reagan Justice Department's refusal to prosecute black Muslim Louis Farrakhan, even though they admit he broadcast a threat to the life of black reporter Milton Coleman. Spokesman Roussel was also asked about the Reagan Justice Department's refusal to prosecute California Congressman Ron Dellums. Dellums was identified by a federal magistrate as having received cocaine from a white distributor who was sent to a federal penitentiary. Roussel was also asked about the Reagan administration's refusal to prosecute Jesse Jackson's Push organization for $750,000 in financial irregularity. Roussel, as assistant spokesman of the White House, replied twice, "I'm just not going to get into that subject." On another issue, when asked how President Reagan feels when he learned that Communist China's latest honored guest was PLO terrorist Yasser Arafat, Roussel said, and this is a quote, "The president was pleased and honored to be invited to China." First story.
It's almost like the apocryphal story, speaking of the media, when Nixon was in office a number of years ago, there was an announcement about a press conference, and he decided to hold it instead of the executive office building down by the Potomac. And so the limo shows up after the Outriders and everything else, and Nixon comes down to the bank of the Potomac, and there are the reporters and the cameramen with the Klieg lights and the cameras and what have you. And he takes off his shoes and socks and very calmly walks across the Potomac, then walks back, puts on his shoes and socks, doesn't say a word, gets back into the limo, goes back home. Next morning, the Washington Post headlines was, "Nixon can't swim."
Okay, we get the point. I'm a right-winger with conscience, I guess. I take limited pride in the Grenadas of the world because even though I know why I'm proud and why I approve of of action. I don't want to be perceived by enemies or by neutrals who are potential friends. I don't want to be perceived by them as being what they think we all are anyhow. You understand? You know, rah-rah, bloody shirt, red flag, macho. But I can stand up. I can stand up, Bruce, and I hope you will too, and be loudly proud, not quietly proud or halfway openly proud, but I think we can be loudly proud. Look what we've done. We have preserved a democracy in El Salvador. Look at the odds. Look who got there first. Look who had the head start. Look who's spending how much money from around the world to destabilize that country and put in a Marxist dictatorship. And somehow we prevailed. Howard K. Smith was right. Democracy lives in El Salvador, and I think that's worth all the champagne we were too timid to drink after Grenada. I'm sorry. Forgive me for being a snob. I accuse you of not having what it takes to enjoy Jesse Jackson.
Yeah, but
enjoy Jesse Jackson. You are missing one of the greatest free shows in the history of American theater. And for you to come railing at me about what Jesse Jackson said at this late stage of the Jackson manifestation, of the Jackson phenomenon, of the Jackson candidacy, Danny, the surest sign you got no sense is to take somebody seriously who hasn't.
Yeah, but this man, along the trail, he can make trouble. I see trouble with this man.
No, I don't see trouble. I see entertainment. I'm sorry, pal. I see entertainment. Mark me down as a complacent. Have you got a book where you put all of our names down and put marks beside it? Put me down as a complacent. When it comes to Jesse Jackson, I am a complacent.